Hello my dear viewers, I would like to thank you for watching the video, and I wanted to say subscribe to my YouTube channel. I will be very grateful and you will not miss new videos. Enjoy the video. You never expect to find something sinister in your grandmother's attic. Especially not when you're just helping clean out her house after she moves to a retirement community in Florida. But that's exactly what happened to me last October. I'm Sarah Mitchell, and until that day my life was perfectly ordinary. I was working as a high school English teacher in a small town in Massachusetts, grading papers and dealing with teenage drama. My grandmother Helen had lived in the same Victorian house for over 50 years, and it was filled with decades of memories and apparently secrets. The attic was dusty and cramped, filled with boxes of old photographs, holiday decorations, and furniture covered in yellowed sheets. The autumn sun filtered through a small round window, creating long shadows that danced across the wooden floorboards. I was going through the last corner when I found it, a polished mahogany box with intricate carvings about the size of a shoebox. At first, I thought it was just another jewelry box like the dozens of others I'd already packed away. But this one had no keyhole, no obvious way to open it. Instead, it had a series of small wooden panels that could be slid around, like one of those puzzle boxes you see in escape rooms. I've always loved puzzles, so I sat down cross-legged on the floor and started working on it. It took me almost an hour, but finally I heard a satisfying click. Inside, I found a stack of letters, all addressed to my grandmother, dating back to 1962. They were from someone named James Cooper, a name I'd never heard before. The first letter started with "My dearest Helen" and ended with "Forever yours," but it was the contents that made my blood run cold. James wrote about a plan that had worked perfectly and how no one would ever find out what they did. He mentioned something about $50,000, a fortune in 1962, and a man named Richard Baker who had disappeared without a trace. I knew I should have put the letters back. I knew I should have called my mom or asked my grandmother about them. But something compelled me to keep reading. That's when I noticed the newspaper clipping tucked between the pages. The headline read, "Local bank manager Richard Baker missing, police suspect foul play." My sweet, cookie-baking grandmother who taught Sunday school, what had she been involved in? And more importantly, what was I supposed to do with this information now? Just then, my phone buzzed. It was a text from my grandmother. "Sarah, dear, did you find a mahogany box in the attic? The one with the sliding panels. I need you to bring it to me in Florida. Right away. Don't open it, please." I stared at my phone, my heart pounding. What would you do? Pretend you never found it? Turn it over to the police? Or drive to Florida and face your grandmother, who might not be the person you thought she was at all? I wish I could say I made the moral choice, marched straight to the police station or confronted my grandmother immediately. Instead, I did what any reasonable person would do. I panicked. I carefully repacked the letters, closed the puzzle box, and shoved it into my backpack. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept reading and rereading the letters until the words blurred together. There were 12 in total, spanning from February to December 1962. Each one painted a clearer picture of whatever scheme James and my grandmother had orchestrated. They mentioned meetups at a place called Charlie's Diner, discussions about bank records, and something about a boat on Lake Winnipesaukee. The most disturbing letter was dated October 15, 1962. James wrote, Helen, my love, you were brilliant today. The way you handled Margaret Baker's questions at the funeral, Oscar-worthy performance, no one suspects a thing. Richard's grieving widow will get the insurance money next week, and then we'll be home free. I googled Richard Baker death 1960 to Massachusetts and fell down a rabbit hole. Richard Baker had been the manager of First National Bank in our town. He disappeared after closing time on a Friday, leaving behind his wife Margaret and their 2 young children. The case went cold after a few months. Some thought he'd embezzled money and fled to South America. Others suspected foul play. Here's the thing that really got to me. My grandmother had been a teller at that same bank. I called in sick to work the next day and started the drive to Florida. 20 hours on the road gave me plenty of time to think. Was my grandmother a murderer? A thief? Both. And who was James Cooper? I tried searching his name too, but with no luck. About halfway through Georgia, my phone rang. Unknown number. Hello, my voice cracked. Sarah Mitchell. The man's voice was elderly but strong. You don't know me, but I knew your grandmother. And James Cooper. I worked at First National back in '62. My hands started shaking so badly I had to pull over. How did you get this number? I asked. Helen called me, he said. Told me you found the box. Listen carefully. You're in danger. They never found Richard's body because the line went dead. I tried calling back. Nothing. Just voicemail. That's when I noticed the black SUV that had been behind me for the last 100 miles. The driver was wearing a hat and sunglasses, despite it being nearly sunset. My grandmother's retirement community was still for hours away. But suddenly, I wasn't sure I wanted to get there at all. The thing about being followed on a highway is that you can never be completely sure. Maybe I was just being paranoid. Maybe that black SUV really did happen to be going the same direction for 200 miles. Maybe, but when I pulled into a gas station just outside of Jacksonville and the SUV pulled in too, I knew it wasn't paranoia. I pretended to browse the snack aisle while watching the driver through the security mirror. He was tall, probably in his 60s, with silver hair peeking out from under his baseball cap. Something about him seemed familiar, but I couldn't place it. He bought a coffee and returned to his vehicle without looking at me once. That's when I remembered. There was a photo in one of the letters. A group shot outside the bank dated summer 1962. James Cooper had his arm around my grandmother, and next to them was a young man with dark hair and sharp features. The same face, just 50 years younger. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Don't go to Sunshine Palms. Helen isn't there. Meet me at the Ocean View Cafe on A1A. 1 hour? Come alone, bring the box. Sunshine Palms was my grandmother's retirement community. With shaking hands, I called them. Hi, I'm trying to reach Helen Mitchell in Unit 147. Oh, I'm sorry, the receptionist said. Mrs. Mitchell checked out 3 days ago. Her daughter picked her up. My mother was in Europe. I'd just spoken to her yesterday. I had two choices, meet the mysterious texter at the cafe or call the police, but what would I tell them? That my grandmother might have been involved in a 60-year-old crime. That I found some letters suggesting she wasn't exactly who she claimed to be. That someone who might or might not be following me wanted to meet. I drove to the cafe but parked across the street, watching. It was a small beachside place, practically empty except for an elderly couple and a woman sitting alone by the window. She looked to be in her 70s, elegant in a blue dress, her silver hair perfectly styled. As I watched, she lifted her coffee cup with trembling hands. My phone buzzed again. "I see you, Sarah. I'm Margaret Baker." Yes, that Margaret Baker. Richard was my husband. I've been waiting a very long time to talk to someone about what really happened that night. Your grandmother isn't the only one with secrets. The woman in blue raised her hand and waved directly at me. I reached for the mahogany box in my backpack. The same black SUV was still idling down the street, but now I could see the driver was on the phone. Whatever truth lay behind Richard Baker's disappearance, I was about to learn it. I just hoped I wouldn't disappear too. The bell above the cafe door chimed as I walked in. Margaret Baker's eyes never left me as I approached her table, the mahogany box clutched against my chest like a shield. "You look just like her," Margaret said softly. "Helen, I mean, back in 1962. I slid into the booth across from her. Up close, I could see the years hadn't been kind to Margaret Baker. Deep lines marked her face, and her hands wouldn't stop shaking. "I know what you think happened," she said, stirring her coffee. "That Helen and James murdered Richard for the money. That's what everyone thought, but the truth... Oh, the truth is much stranger." She reached into her purse and pulled out a leather wallet. Inside was a police badge. "Richard Baker wasn't just a bank manager," she said. "He was an undercover FBI agent investigating a counterfeiting ring. James Cooper was his partner." My head spun. What about my grandmother? Helen was their inside source. She discovered the counterfeiting operation was being run by the bank president himself, Charles Montgomery. But something went wrong. The night Richard disappeared, he called me in a panic. Said he had proof Montgomery was planning to kill him. He was supposed to meet Helen at Charlie's diner to get final evidence, but he never made it. I pulled out the letters. Then why did James write these? About the plan working perfectly. Margaret's eyes widened. Those aren't from James. Look at the handwriting closely. Compare it to the signature. Someone was pretending to be him. She was right. The handwriting in the body of the letters was slightly different from the signatures. "Charles Montgomery wrote those letters," Margaret said. "He planted them in that box for someone to find eventually. He wanted to frame Helen and James if the truth ever came out, but here's what he didn't know." The cafe door chimed again. The man from the SUV walked in. Margaret smiled, right on time. The man removed his hat and sunglasses. He had to be in his 80s, but I recognized him from the old photo, James Cooper. "Sorry about the cloak and dagger routine," he said, sitting down next to Margaret. "But we had to make sure you weren't being followed. Charles Montgomery's son David is now the bank president. He's been watching Helen for years, afraid she'd eventually tell someone what she knew." "Where is she?" I demanded. The retirement home said. "She's safe," James assured me. "We moved her when we realized David Montgomery was closing in. But she wanted you to find that box. She knew you'd figure it out." Margaret reached across the table and took my hand. "Richard's body was found last month. A construction crew dug it up behind the old bank building. And we finally have proof of who killed him. But we need your help, Sarah. Those letters you found. They're not just letters. Your grandmother hid something inside them." Something that will prove what really happened that night. I opened the box and pulled out the letters again. In the fading sunlight coming through the cafe window, I noticed something odd about the paper. Holding the letters up to the light, I could see tiny pinpricks through certain letters. My grandmother had used a pin to create a code, dots under specific characters that, when connected, formed words. A message hidden in plain sight all these years. She was a puzzle lover too, James said, smiling. Helen knew these letters might be found someday, so she left proof that couldn't be destroyed. Working together, we decoded the message. CM darkroom behind Vault 10 PMOCT 12RB shot twice J's saw all. Charles Montgomery, Margaret whispered. The bank's darkroom, where they processed security camera film. That's where Richard was killed. James nodded grimly. JS was Janet Smith, the cleaning lady. She witnessed everything but was too scared to come forward. She left town the next day. Charles Montgomery made sure she disappeared too. But why? I asked. What was worth killing for? Margaret pulled out an old photograph. It showed Charles Montgomery standing proudly in front of the bank. Look at the date, she said. October 11th, 1962. The day before Richard was murdered. In the photo, Montgomery was wearing an expensive watch and ring. Now look at this one. She produced another photo, dated October 13th. Same pose, same smile, but different jewelry. Richard discovered Montgomery wasn't just counterfeiting money, James explained. He was replacing real diamonds and jewelry from safety deposit boxes with fakes. Millions worth. He'd been doing it for years. The counterfeiting operation was just a cover for an even bigger scheme. When Richard confronted him that night, Margaret continued, Montgomery killed him. But Janet Smith saw everything through the darkroom door's window. Your grandmother knew too. She'd seen Montgomery coming out of the vault at odd hours, noticed the discrepancies in the ledgers. But without proof, I looked at the box again. The intricate sliding panels suddenly made sense. There's more to this box, isn't there? James reached over and pressed a hidden catch I hadn't noticed. The bottom panel slid away, revealing a false bottom. Inside lay a small notebook, its pages yellow with age. Janet Smith's diary, Margaret said. She gave it to Helen before she fled. Your grandmother kept it safe all these years, waiting for the right time. And now, David Montgomery was arrested this morning, James announced. The FBI found the original jewelry in a storage unit rented under his father's name. He'd been selling off pieces slowly for years. Your grandmother's evidence was the final piece they needed. My phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. Turn on the news, sweetheart. Love, Grandma? Breaking news, 60-year-old bank heist solved, father-son criminal enterprise exposed. Is she really safe? I asked. James smiled. Why don't you ask her yourself? The cafe door opened one last time. My grandmother walked in, looking exactly like she always did, floral dress, pearl necklace, gentle smile. But now I saw something else in her eyes, strength, determination. The look of a woman who had carried a secret for 60 years to make sure justice would finally be served. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you sooner, Sarah, she said, hugging me tight. But some puzzles take time to solve, and you solved this one perfectly. As we sat there in that beachside cafe, my grandmother told me the full story. Not just about the crime, but about courage, patience, and the power of truth. Sometimes the biggest mysteries aren't about what we find. They're about who we discover people really are. The mahogany puzzle box sits on my desk now, a reminder that every family has its secrets, but some secrets are worth keeping until the right moment comes to let them out. Thank you for watching this video to the end. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel. This will help me work better and faster for you. I would be grateful, so watch my other videos.